Some, if not most, of the weapons and equipment on parade during Republic Day are Russian-made or assembled in India. The Stockholm International Peace Research Institute says India bought $35 billion worth of Russian arms over 23 years from 1992 to 2015. And in 2007, India surpassed China as the biggest recipient of Russian arms sales. Yet, India and Russia are seen as drifting apart. Bilateral trade is less than $8 billion. India has diversified arms buying to include the US and Israel. The 2005 Civil Nuclear Agreement has underscored the growing strategic relationship with Washington. Ties with Japan, South Korea and Australia are moving forward. Russia's annexation of Crimea and the war on Ukraine has seen it move close to China. It is backing China's Belt and Road Initiative. Russia is also using Pakistan to talk to the Taliban. Modi is concerned and is expected to address President Putin frankly on these matters in St Petersburg. India values the Russian connection because it is a veto-wielding permanent member of the Security Council. It is also the country to have passed on to India strategic technologies for nuclear submarines and also cruise missile technologies. Till date, Russia has built 2 nuclear power plants in India. 2 more are under construction, with 2 more likely to be finalized now. Looking at the future, Modi and Putin could look at cooperation in the Eurasian Economic Union, a free trade area that could rival China's Belt and Road. It's all about vision and opportunities, something Narendra Modi and Vladimir Putin understand. Bureau Report, WION.
Prime Minister Modi was on the front page banner of the Russian paper Rossiyskaya Gazeta. He spoke to the president of Russia, Vladimir Putin, and said that they are both committed to taking forward Indo-Russia relations to newer heights. Let's listen in to both the leaders after the meeting.
रशिया और भारत सदा सर्वदा साथ रहे हैं और एससीओ की हमारी मेंबरशिप के लिए भी आपका प्रोएक्टिव रोल रहा है, सक्रिय भूमिका रही और उसके कारण अब हम विधिवत रूप से एससीओ के मेंबर बनने जा रहे हैं। मैं उसके लिए आपने जो कुछ भी इनिशिएटिव लिए, मैं हृदय से आपका आभार व्यक्त करता हूँ।
Я очень рад возможности встретиться с вами, поговорить по всему комплексу и двусторонних отношений, и международных проблем. Ну а что касается международных нашего взаимодействия, то здесь хотел бы отметить только одну вещь.
Prime Minister Modi making a statement as we speak. Let's listen in.
7 दशकों से कई महानुभावों ने सींचा है। ऐसे ही एक व्यक्ति थे एम्बेसडर अलेक्जेंडर कदाकिन। भारत के इस मित्र को हमने इस वर्ष खो दिया। रूस के इस गौरवशाली पुत्र की याद में नई दिल्ली में एक सड़क का नामकरण एम्बेसडर कदाकिन के नाम पर आज किया गया है। एक्सेलेंसी पुतिन, वक्त की हर कसौटी पर, हर चुनौती के सामने आपने समाजों के विकास के लिए तथा पूरे विश्व के लाभ के लिए भारत तथा रूस की स्ट्रेटेजिक पार्टनरशिप एक पिलर ऑफ स्ट्रेंथ रही है। हमारी अड़िग साझेदारी आगे आने वाले वर्षों में विश्व को एक संतुलन एवं स्थिरता प्रदान करेगी। आज की वार्ता में लिए गए निर्णय हमारे सहयोग के मार्ग को और अधिक प्रशस्त करेंगे। इन शब्दों के साथ एक बार फिर मैं आपका तथा सेंट पीटर्सबर्ग की जनता का हृदय से अभिनंदन करता हूं। बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद।
So, statement there by the Indian Prime Minister. Joining us this evening, Nandan Unnikrishnan, Senior Fellow at ORF from New Delhi, and Dr. Marcus Papadopoulos, publisher and editor of Politics First, joining us from London. Good evening to both of you. Nandan Unnikrishnan, let's start with bilateral trade. That is one area where Indo-Russian ties are not reflected in terms of volume. It was $11 billion bilateral trade a few years back, now less than $8 billion. What happened?
Well, firstly, thank you for inviting me to this discussion. Secondly, bilateral trade is not something I believe that governments control. I think that given the nature of economies in the two countries, unless the Indian private sector gets involved in trade and economic ties, we are not going to see substantial increase in volumes of bilateral trade. But what I would like to point out is that having heard Prime Minister Modi's statement, I think you have to change your intro. There does not seem to be a divergence of strategic and national interests.
Well, we hope so. The Prime Minister addressing 4,000 businessmen from 60 countries in what has come to be known over the years as the Russian Davos. Marcus, my question to you is, they've set a target of $30 billion in bilateral trade by the year 2030. That seems too optimistic given where we stand today. Do you think Russia can do more in terms of proactively opening its market, reducing non-tariff barriers?
Well, that may sound optimistic, but it's important to establish something, that history is on the side of Indo-Russian relations. Russians have historically had a very keen interest in India, and that is exemplified by the correspondence between Leo Tolstoy and Mahatma Gandhi. And then, of course, there is the relationship which blossomed between India and the Soviet Union from the late 1950s to 1991, when both countries developed and maintained very close political, economic and military relations. Indeed, the Soviet Union was India's arguably most important friend and ally. So while the world has changed since the 1990s, when relations between India and Russia plummeted because of the collapse of the Soviet Union, and while world alliances are changing today, for example, President Putin, in his attempt to push back against American attempts to subdue Russia, is caught in both Pakistan and China. There is no reason why India and Russia cannot get back onto track in establishing those very, very close relations from the past, in resurrecting those close relations from the past. And I think that the future is very, very unpredictable for both countries. And I do believe that India and Russia in the long term will need each other.
Right. Let's break it down to the areas where there has been cooperation traditionally. Nandan Unikrishnan, nuclear cooperation is one such focus area. Contracts for nuclear power plants and units, I understand, are held up in India. Is India then using its leverage with Russia to try and persuade it to tell China to stop the NSG blockade?
I think you read the Times of India too much.
I don't, by the way.
Basically, I don't think that...
yes, please do
Can I carry on?
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Yeah. We have 3 or 4 areas of traditional cooperation which have, according to this statements that have been heard from Putin and Modi during this trip, which have been further consolidated. One of them, of course, is the military-industrial context. The second is civil nuclear cooperation. The third is cooperation in high technologies. And it is very interesting to note that Prime Minister Modi is trying to use our strongest element, which is our military technical cooperation, to address our weakest element, which is economic ties, by getting the Russians to participate actively in the defense sector, in the Make in India program. And the Russians, according to what I heard Mr. Putin say, seem to have responded positively and apart from, of course, the helicopter project, are considering several other projects for participation. On the civil nuclear side, I think they've both agreed to continue with Kudankalam Block 5 and 6. I do not think we should seriously take reports in newspapers that you do not read about us applying pressure on them to apply pressure on China, for the simple reason that I think anyone who sits in South Bloc will understand that if we want to apply pressure on China, then maybe we should talk to the Americans, who have a much deeper and broader relationship with the Chinese than the Russians.
Right. Marcus, you said that Russia and India are going to need each other in the future given the changing geopolitical scenario. But the fact is that Russia has been moving closer to China. Vladimir Putin was an active participant in the Belt and Road Forum, which India skipped. How does Moscow see its relation with India vis-a-vis China?
Well, I fully understand why President Putin has developed relations with Pakistan and in particular China, because the sanctions which have been placed on the Russian economy by the West have taken a toll on the Russian economy. And to compensate for that, Russia has had to turn eastwards, i.e. towards China. But having said that, Russia does have to be very careful because, as I said, India is a traditional friend and ally to Russia. And I'm not so sure that Pakistan is a genuine ally to Russia. Let's be clear about it. Pakistan is a staunch friend and ally to America. And irrespective of how close relations become between Islamabad and Moscow, Pakistan is not going to ditch America for Russia. And in regard to China, well, yes, relations between Beijing and Moscow are at the highest level in the history of those two countries. Both the Russian leader and the Chinese leader have made that very clear. But at the same time, the challenge in that relationship between Russia and China is that China is heavily dependent on America in economic terms. The Chinese have massive investments in America, and hypothetically speaking, if America was to be bankrupt tomorrow, then the Chinese economy would become bankrupt. So given that China and Pakistan, in my estimation, are not true friends and allies to Russia, that leaves the door open to India and Russia resurrecting those strong relations from the past, because people in India and people in Russia have a very, very positive opinion of each other. There is not the sort of suspicion that exists in some quarters between Russians and Chinese. And I think Indians will always remember what the Soviet Union did for the country following its independence from Britain. The Russians played a very, very important part in building up India politically and especially economically, militarily. There was a lot of construction projects carried out by the Russians in India. For example, bridges and dams, hospitals and schools were built by the Russians. So I think in light of that, Russia really does have to recognise that it must not alienate India in the long term by its current relationship with China and Pakistan. I would also add that Russia has to be careful of its relationship with Israel, because Israel is a staunch friend and ally to America. And of course, whatever happens between relations between Russia and Israel, Israel will not ditch America for Russia.
Right. You mentioned Pakistan. Nandan Unnikrishnan, we understand Prime Minister Modi did raise or was expected to raise the issue of Russia's growing ties with Pakistan and the Taliban. Do you believe that India can persuade Moscow to not enter into some sort of a defense or strategic arrangement with the Pakistanis?
Well, I think President Putin has answered that question. He very clearly said that Russia does not have, quote-unquote, tight military relations with Pakistan. And to interpret that, what he means is that India and Russia have a very structured military technical cooperation arena, while with Pakistan it is sporadic. And I would tend to agree with Marcus completely that I think the relationship with Pakistan, of Russia that is, the Russian relationship with Pakistan is tactical, and I do worry about Russia's flirtation with the Taliban, but I am not certain that now that this meeting has taken place between Modi and Putin, that is likely to go very far.
Marcus, you keep drawing on the past and you keep talking about this true friendship. I wonder how you measure it because we're looking at the future. Are you saying that there are no wrinkles in the relationship, or are you saying that it won't be very difficult to iron them out?
Oh, well, of course, there's challenges in the present relationship.
I am very clear. Sorry.
Of course, there's present challenges in the relationship between Russia and India. Let's not forget that the consequences of the collapse of the Soviet Union were disastrous for Indo-Russian relations, and the damage inflicted on Russia's relations with India and Russia's relations with other countries in the world, for example, Cuba, are not going to be remedied overnight. They're going to take a long time. But that said, Russia and India have history on their side. They both are posed with a potent threat from radical Islam. India and Russia know very well just how malignant Islamists are. And I think that is one of the reasons that will ensure that sooner or later relations between India and Russia will go back to how they were during the Soviet period. And I think that Russia will undoubtedly keep on courting Pakistan and China, and I understand why it's doing that. But at the same time, it's a fine balancing act with Moscow, because Moscow does not want to lose its strategic relationship with India.
Right. Before I wrap, Nandan Unikrishnan, you were trying to make a point, I believe. No,
I was merely trying to say that, there is a great amount of uncertainty in the world today. And given that uncertainty, it is more than likely that there are differences going to crop up even in the most time-tested of relationships. And we do have a few wrinkles in our relationship with Russia. But as I said, I think the way things are developing in the world, India is going to have to make an effort to maintain good relations with all great powers. And this is going to be a task for all great powers, even Russia. And I agree with Marcus that Russia will have to also invest and reach out to India to maintain the strategic relationship. And while it may not be the same as it was with the Soviet Union, but it is a time-tested relationship, and Russia also has very few friends like India.
Right, and Russia and India marked the 70th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic relations last month, and 70% of India's import orders, defense import orders in the past 5 years came from Russia. So there is a lot of solid ground to build on. Thanks very much, Marcus, Nandan Unikrishnan. Thank you both for joining us here and sharing your thoughts and perspective. We're taking a break. Still ahead on Gravitas. Will he, won't he? Donald Trump has kept up the suspense, but reports say his exit from the Paris Accord is just a matter of time, perhaps in the next few hours. More on that on the other side of this break.